In the heart of America's most beautiful wilderness, something is going terribly wrong. Hikers vanish without a trace. Children disappear in broad daylight. Rescue dogs refuse to search. And when the bodies are found, if they're found there, in places no human could ever reach, these aren't ordinary missing persons cases. These are missing 411. And tonight, we're going beyond the headlines, into the stories that never made it out of the woods. Unexplained footage, lost audio files, terrified eyewitnesses. What we've uncovered isn't just unsettling, it's impossible, and yet, someone or something wants us to know it's real. Welcome to Farcical Fears, where the truth hides in static, and the horror hides in plain sight. If you're brave enough to look deeper, subscribe now. But don't be surprised if something starts looking back. Let's move to our first story. They call it the Echo Trail. I used to be a seasonal forest ranger up in Montana, near Glacier National Park. Big country, thick pine or jagged terrain. The kind of place that makes you feel small the second you step out of your truck. I was stationed at a fire lookout tower, a 30-foot high cabin on stilts with a two-way radio, binoculars, a generator, and too many nights alone. It was my third season up there when we got the call. A solo hiker named Owen Masters hadn't checked in. No cell reception up in the ridges, so that's not uncommon. But he was 3 days overdue. His car was still parked at the trailhead. Tent was found, zipped from the inside, boots neatly placed outside, fire pit cold. Just gone. Now. We're trained for this stuff. I joined the search with SAR the next morning. Dogs, maps, rope lines, grid sweeps. But something felt wrong from the start. The dogs, good ones, refused to go more than 50 feet past his camp. Whined, pulled back. One actually peed itself and had to be carried out. I had never seen that. The weirdness really started that night. I was back at the tower, scanning the tree line with binoculars, when I heard it. A voice, faint and distant. Hello? I froze. Scanned again. Nothing. Then again, closer this time. Can anyone hear me? Please. The voice was panicked, male. It sounded exactly like the missing guy. I grabbed the radio and called it in, but no one else heard it. I convinced myself it was the wind, maybe an echo, maybe my own mind. That was night 1. Night 2. The voice came back, only this time it was circling the tower. That's when it stopped being explainable. I stepped onto the deck, shined my light. Trees swayed. Nothing moved, but the voice kept calling. I'm cold, please. Help me. And it always came from a different direction. North, then south, then right under the tower. I shouted back once, I'll admit. Where are you? But it didn't answer. It just laughed, a slow, broken kind of laugh. It was him, but not him. Day 3. The SAR team found a body about 5 miles west of his camp, up an elevation you'd need gear to reach. He had no gear, and the autopsy said he'd been dead for at least a week. That meant the voice I'd been hearing. It started after he died. I didn't sleep after that. I kept the lights on, the rifle loaded. The radio squawked once, round 2. AM white noise. Then a voice whispered through, you shouldn't have answered. I put in for reassignment the next morning. But here's the thing. That his trail got quietly closed the next year. No announcement. Just blocked off. I asked a buddy who still works the region. He said 2 more hikers vanished there. Both solo. Neither found. One of them left a voicemail on her sister's phone that night. All it said was, he's calling me. It's beautiful. I think I know him. You won't find that recording anywhere now. You won't find the reports either. They scrub them fast. The Park Service has their own version of damage control. I don't go into the woods anymore. Not alone. Not ever, because I think whatever's out there, it wears our voices like a costume, like bait. It mimics pain to lure help. It mimics fear to sound familiar. And if you answer it, if you talk back, it learns you. So if you ever hear someone calling for help, and it sounds a little too far, too broken, like it's bouncing off the trees in the wrong direction, don't answer. Not unless you want to end up on someone else's radio, echoing through the trees. Let's move to our second story. This one comes from an old answering machine tape labeled only as June Lake Cabin -1998. It was submitted anonymously, postmarked from Arizona, no return address. The tape came with a note written in shaky handwriting that said, "Play this only if you still believe time moves forward." The audio starts with static, then a man's voice, calm but tired. His name is Rob, a wildlife photographer, apparently, recording a travel diary. He's staying alone in a remote lakeside cabin somewhere in the Sierra Nevadas, miles off any main road. He's there to photograph owls, but he keeps mentioning something off. He says the lake hums at night. Not in a poetic way, literally hums, like electricity through water. And the sky over the lake? Too many stars, more than he remembers as a kid. He chalks it up to altitude and fatigue. But then, the recordings change. On day 3, he records a message to someone named Laura, apologizing for not calling. He sounds nervous. He mentions that the shadows around the cabin are wrong in the morning. They stretch in odd directions, even when the sun is overhead. He tried taking a photo of it, but the picture came out black, not overexposed, just pure void. That night, there's another clip. You can hear the wind outside. And then Rob whispers, "There's someone walking on the lake." It's not frozen. You can hear it, 2 faint splashes, slow, deliberate. No animal would move like that. Rob keeps whispering. He's walking straight toward the cabin. Then silence. For over 20 minutes, nothing. Until a loud knock against the wood. Not the door, the wall. He doesn't record again until the next evening. His voice is shaky, and he's been drinking. He says he's not sure what day it is anymore. His watch stopped, and the daylight lasts too long. He woke up at 8 a.m., but the sun was already at its peak. He talks about hearing his own voice calling from outside during the night, soft, distorted. It said the exact thing I said yesterday, like it was trapped out there, repeating. On the 5th tape, things spiral. He says he hasn't slept. The lake is glowing faintly at night now. Something under the surface pulses with light rhythmic, like a heartbeat. The trees cast no shadows anymore. Everything is too still. He leaves his camera running at night, and in the background of the recording, you can hear this wet clicking sound like bone against glass dot. And then Rob says something terrifying every night. I watch myself walk out of the cabin. He describes seeing a figure that looks exactly like him. Step off the porch, barefoot, eyes open but unblinking, and walk into the forest. He locks the doors, boards the windows. Still, it happens. Every night. I wake up, and the bed is empty, he says, but I'm still in it. His last tape is mostly static. Wind occasional thuds. But near the end, there's a single sentence that cuts through. I think the lake remembered a version of me. That never left. Then, nothing. There's no official record of a man named Rob ever staying at a June Lake cabin that year. No. Missing. Persons report filed under that name. The return address on the envelope. Turns out, it belongs to an old ranger station that burned down in 2004. We've tried enhancing the tapes, cleaning the audio, even matching the voice. Nothing. But there's one part of the note that keeps bothering me, what Rob said about time. Because the person who received that envelope, the one who submitted the tapes, claims something strong. He said he never knew Rob, never heard of June Lake. But when he picked up the envelope from his porch, he swore it was already open, like someone had read it first. And on the back of the final cassette, there was a smudge barely visible in red ink. It said, "Play me again tomorrow. I sound different every time. So if you ever find yourself alone in a cabin far from the road, and the lake seems a little too still, don't stay, because maybe that place remembers a version of you that never made it home." Let's move to our third story. This one comes from a man named Yusuf, a nurse who worked nights at a privately run geriatric care center in upstate New York. The facility, built in the 1920s, was originally a sanitarium before being converted into an elder care home in the 70s. Yusuf had only been working there for 6 weeks when the incident occurred. He kept a private audio journal on his phone for personal therapy. What he captured one night was never meant to be shared, but after what happened, he sent the files anonymously to a paranormal researcher before leaving the country. Yusuf worked the overnight shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Most nights were slow. Most of the residents slept through the night with the help of medication, and Yusuf was left to check vitals, clean linens, and record hourly reports. On the night in question, he was assigned to the 3rd floor, which housed patients suffering from late-stage dementia and severe neurological disorders. What made this ward disturbing wasn't just the silence, it was how wrong that silence felt. As if something was listening back. At 12 a.m., Yusuf's audio journal begins. His voice is calm but distracted. He mentions something odd. One of the patients, Ms. Rowena Collister, had been facing the corner of her room for hours, unmoving. When he called out to her, she replied with a single sentence in a voice too deep for her. "I can hear the 5th one now." Yusuf had no idea what that meant. Later that night, the hallway lights began flickering, but only in front of room 309, Ms. Callister's room. Maintenance blamed the old wiring, but Yusuf noted something worse. All the call buttons in that hallway lit up at once, even the empty rooms. When he checked room 311, which had been unoccupied since a death weeks earlier, he found the bed freshly made and a glass of water still cold on the nightstand. The chart on the door simply read, J. Collister, but Ms. Collister had no living relatives. She had no children. That name shouldn't exist. The journal continues. Around 3:27 a.m., Yusuf's voice grows panicked. He reports hearing the intercom click on by itself, followed by a distorted recording. The voice of a child humming the same lullaby that played on the facility's old gramophone system back in the 40s. But there was no working gramophone. It had been sealed in the basement storage room for decades. In the final hour of his shift, things escalate. He enters Miss Callister's room again and finds her standing in the middle of the bed, barefoot, whispering to someone Yusuf cannot see. He tries to calm her, but she looks directly at him and says, "The others are folding themselves in again. They never stopped." Yusuf, terrified, calls security, but when they arrive minutes later, she's asleep in her bed, breathing steadily, eyes closed, as if nothing had happened. The bed isn't even disturbed. Yusuf tries to convince himself he's hallucinating, that he's overworked, sleep deprived. But when he returns to the nurse's station, his clipboard is missing. He finds it 1 hour later in the freezer of the staff kitchen. The chart is updated with patient vitals, all filled incorrectly for times when Yusuf was not on the floor. But every signature reads the same, J. Collister. Here's where it gets truly unsettling. The audio Yusuf sent includes one final file, timestamped for 44 a.m. It's less than a minute long. There's heavy static, distant whispering, Then, in perfect clarity, a voice that is not Yusuf says, "The fifth one is awake now. You're looking at it." The file ends. Yusuf never returned to the care home. His apartment was found abandoned days later, everything intact except for one item, the phone he used to record his journals. It was gone. But 2 weeks after he vanished, the facility received a call asking to speak to Ms. Rowena Collister. When the receptionist explained that she had passed away 2 days earlier, the voice on the other end paused, then calmly replied, "She left something open. I'm coming to close it," and then hung up. "We've tried tracing the number, dead, and the line was never active. The phone company has no record of that call ever being made." But here's what truly haunts me. Yusuf's first entry from that night. The very first sentence he said into his recorder. "I think someone else clocked in with me tonight." Let's move to our fourth story. This one was posted in fragments across an obscure forum in 2012, under a deleted account with the name Infraredin. What caught people's attention wasn't the story itself at first. It was the file. Attached, a low-resolution thermal image showing a single red-hot figure, standing at the edge of a freeway tunnel in the middle of the night, arms outstretched, surrounded by icy blue emptiness. But it's the context that still haunts me. The story came from a woman named Iris, who was driving cross-country with her fiancé, Nathan. They were moving from Pennsylvania to Oregon. Fresh start. New jobs, new life. It was past midnight when they hit a long stretch of remote highway near the Rockies. The GPS rerouted them due to a landslide and sent them down a narrow, unlit detour known as Crane Pass Tunnel. It wasn't on any physical map. Iris even joked that it looked more like a maintenance route than an actual road. They entered anyway. The tunnel was longer than expected, over 4 minutes of solid black. No overhead lights, just the beam of their headlights stretching through thick concrete. Nathan mentioned feeling a pressure in his ears, like descending in a plane. Iris felt nothing. But when they exited the tunnel, it didn't feel like the same world. At first, everything looked normal. Same car, same road, same landscape. But their phones had no service. The radio played a loop of silence interrupted by a voice whispering numbers, not station numbers, just digits like coordinates. Iris looked back at the tunnel and said it seemed further away than it should be, like it was shrinking behind them. And then a figure appeared on the shoulder. It was a man, completely still, wearing what looked like a hospital gown, head tilted, barefoot. They slowed down instinctively, not out of curiosity, but because the air felt thick, like syrup. Nathan rolled the window down halfway and called out. The man didn't move, but they both heard a sound, a voice that didn't come from him or from anywhere specific. It said, "This is the exit. You never went in." Then the man began walking toward the car, not aggressively, just slowly, as if reenacting a moment he had lived 1,000 times. They sped off, but the horror didn't end there. The next 10 minutes of their drive were completely silent. No wildlife, no insects, not even the sound of the wind. The GPS displayed no road, just a blinking triangle moving across static. Then the odometer began to glitch. It froze, then jumped back 8 miles. When Iris looked into the rearview mirror, the tunnel was still there, closer now, no matter how far they drove. It crept forward in the reflection, like it was following. Then Nathan started bleeding from his nose. He became disoriented and asked Iris what happened to the third person in the car. She laughed nervously, thinking he was joking, but he insisted. He said he remembered her voice and another one, asking questions about the tunnel. Before they entered it, Iris pulled over. She turned off the engine. She sat in silence for a moment, and then realized something that still keeps her awake. She didn't remember entering the tunnel either. Not fully, not clearly. It was like the moment before going under anesthesia. 1 second there, the next, simply gone. Suddenly, headlights appeared behind them. A single pair. White, steady, growing closer, and then fading without a car ever passing. She turned to Nathan, but he was unconscious. Blood still dripping from his nose, and in his lap was a crumpled page torn from a road atlas they didn't own. It was hand-labeled with red marker, Crane Pass, do not exit. Iris panicked. She drove. She drove fast for what felt like hours. But every 20 minutes, the same green sign appeared on the right side of the road, Crane Pass Tunnel. 2 miles ahead they were looping. She doesn't remember crashing the car or being pulled from the wreckage. She just remembers waking up in a hospital 3 days later, alone. When she asked about Nathan, the nurse hesitated and said, "There was no one else in the car with you. No belongings. No ID for him. No record of him ever existing." Iris thought she was losing her mind until one of the nurses pulled her aside in private and handed her a small envelope. No return address. Inside was a thermal photo printed on cheap paper. The image showed a single heat signature, arms raised at the entrance of a tunnel. Beneath it was a handwritten note. The third person went in first. You just remembered it last. Iris hasn't driven since. She says she dreams of tunnels that open into places that look like Earth but aren't. Places that feel like memories you never made but still remember. And in each dream, someone waits at the far end of the tunnel, arms outstretched, eyes closed, like they've been waiting forever. Let's move to our 5th story. This one comes from the mountains of Idaho, buried in the archives of a nearly forgotten AM radio station in Twin Falls. In 1998, the station received a strange, distorted voicemail with no caller ID. The message was almost incomprehensible, static-ridden, broken by sharp clicks like a failing tape deck. But listeners fixated on the background, a mechanical whine, like an old dial-up modem connecting, and faintly behind it, a voice repeating a set of coordinates. No one could confirm where they pointed. Maps didn't match. But a week later, the station received an unmarked envelope in the mail. Inside was a child's drawing and a short message scribbled in all caps. The quiet man of Granger Hollow sees both. The drawing showed a cabin and a long, dark figure at the window. The story traces back to a man named Jacob Wren, a wildlife technician working for the Idaho Department of Fish and Game in the mid-1990s. Back then, there was a spike in migratory disruption across the northern mountain routes. Deer, moose, even birds were abandoning their usual trails, turning away from a particular stretch of land, Granger Hollow. No clear reason, no environmental cause. Jacob was sent to spend 10 days there alone, monitor the area, and collect behavior data. The ranger station gave him a cabin deep in the woods, rustic, off-grid. Just basic shelter with a wood stove, a field log, and a battery-powered radio. He brought a trail camera, motion sensors, and his journal. For the first 2 nights, everything was normal. The air was still. Wildlife was scarce but present. The silence at night was heavy, but not unnatural. Then, on the 3rd night, something changed. Jacob was woken up at 3:10 a.m. by a soft tapping on the cabin window. Not scratching, tapping. Rhythmic. Hesitant. Like the sound of 1 finger, then 2. He got up and looked outside. No movement. He stepped onto the porch, flashlight in hand. Nothing but fog clinging to the trees. The tapping returned the next night. Same time, but from a different window. Still no visible cause. Jacob began to think maybe the old wood was settling strangely, or branches were brushing against the glass. But there were no trees that close to the structure. Out of caution, he set up a motion-activated trail camera about 25 feet from the cabin, facing the farthest edge. It triggered once. At exactly 3:11 a.m. the photo it captured was incomplete. A figure stood behind a tree, just barely visible, like it was hiding. It was tall, impossibly tall, with long arms at its sides, almost dragging. But what unsettled Jacob most wasn't the shape. It was the absence. The figure had no thermal signature. It was cold, dead cold, as if it weren't there at all. He tried to radio it in, but every time he said the word figure, the transmission cut out. Not just static, total silence. It happened 3 times. Jacob hiked to a ridge to get better signal, and something even stranger occurred. As he descended on the opposite side, he found another cabin, an exact copy of his own. Same layout, same porch with the same broken rail he'd tripped on the night before. But this cabin was abandoned, decayed, cobwebs thick in the corners, dust inches deep, rotting wood beams caved in from snow weight. It looked like no one had stepped inside for decades. But here's the thing. Jacob hadn't passed this cabin on the way in. He was sure. There was only one cabin marked on the service map, and this one shouldn't have been here. That night, the tapping returned. First on the window, then from under the floorboards, then from the ceiling. Jacob sat frozen, flashlight in hand. But this time, every light source died. Batteries drained in seconds. The cabin went pitch black. No wind. No insects. The silence was too perfect, like the forest had been turned off. And then, a voice whispered directly into his ear. Not from outside, not from any direction. From inside his head. Do you remember the other cabin? Jacob ran. He didn't stop to pack. He bolted into the woods, disoriented in the dark, running blind for what felt like hours. Eventually, he collapsed. When he opened his eyes, it was morning, and somehow, he was lying at the foot of the original cabin. Not the rotted one. But his things were disturbed. His journal, gone. His trail camera, gone. His gear bag had been unzipped and re-zipped poorly, and placed neatly on the wooden table inside was the same drawing that later arrived at the radio station. A cabin, a figure in the window, long arms, no face, and below it, in broken crayon handwriting, "He's inside both." Jacob packed his remaining belongings and left that same day. When he reported the incident, the department shrugged it off as isolation-induced hallucination. They had no record of a second cabin in the area. When a search team went to verify, they found only his original cabin. The second one was gone, like it had never existed. He never went back. But that wasn't the end. Every year since 1997, on the same date, October 14th, Jacob receives a letter in the mail, no return address. Different postmarks each time. The contents are always the same, a folded sheet of paper, handwritten. One sentence, always written in shaky, childlike script. "You were in the second cabin the whole time." Jacob never opened the letters after the 5th one. He keeps them all sealed in a drawer he says he'll never open again. And every night before bed, he checks every window in his house twice. Not because he's scared of what's outside, but because he wants to be sure nothing is looking in from the other side. Because Jacob believes there are 2 versions of everywhere, 2 places stacked on top of each other, one real, and one just a few degrees off. And sometimes, when you're alone long enough, you cross over without noticing. And the quiet man, he lives in both.